this is course number 12, right? And it is the 5th class, which means it's the second to the last class. Well, a lot of time that you and I have spent together, and we're still going to talk about spirituality, and we're going to go even deeper in some of these aspects of things. And I want to refer you to 2 books of mine. One is Your Soaring Phoenix, which I co-authored with Mary O'Malley. Actually, we co-edited it because there are also 24 other authors that talk about amazing tools that I want you to understand. Your Soaring Phoenix is about transcendent and ascendant tools. But related to recovery from abuse and trauma are the tools of past life regression, interesting, right? Remote viewing, astral projection, and even psychic skills, okay? Now, another book that I have been referencing that's relevant to these as well is Spiritual Paths for Successful Living. And this is the book that I'm talking about has the 14 different paths that you can look at that are both traditional paths of religions as well as not so traditional paths of faith and spirituality. And I break them down into understanding the spiritual laws that are relevant to you living a very thriving and successful life. And I'd love for you to be able to get a hold of that as well. So we're going to talk about past life regressions first. Past life regressions has been shown by research. I love these statistical research. You can just put them right in there and let people know that there's statistical empirical evidence that it says that experience shows 4 to 6 past life regressions tend to help an individual with reducing their anxiety, increasing their sense of meaningfulness and purposefulness in life, help them cope with abuse and traumas in their past and difficulties they encounter in their future, and take away the fear of life because they understand life in a much bigger context. And they also have a relationship with themselves that's more profound because they realize that they are much more complex, much more interesting, and their life is much more integrated into all sorts of different ways of being, which leads into the recognition that life is probably much just a big school. That's something that Wayne Dyer would talk a lot about, is that life is a school. If you look at everything in this life as a lesson to be learned, a classroom that you're attending, and a book to be read, and lessons to learn and to take into your life. If you look at everything in your life along those lines, on one hand you could say, oh, that's just so awful that you would ever give any respect to the horrors that I've gone through and call them a school or life lessons. On the other hand, you do want to think that even if I don't want to give the respect to the abuser and trauma, that you, as a recovering and thriving individual, can look at everything you've gone through and say, I'm going to use it as a school. I'm going to use it as lessons. I'm going to use it as a classroom. And I'm going to be smarter and wiser, more discerning, more savvy, and more amazing because of what I learned over there. And that process of learning from over there converts it into everything in life is a school, it's a classroom, it's a learning process because you've converted it into that. So whether you believe that life is just a big school or you decide to approach life reframed as everything's a lesson, doesn't much matter. And what we find out is people who have gone through past life regressions actually come out with these 6 and more different indices in their life that are very converted. Now, there's also much indication that past life regressions actually has an impact on physical complications, physical pains, complicated relationships that they can extract from, and so forth and so on. So it can be very, very helpful. So now past life regressions kind of go like this. I can do a past life regression an all-day session with an individual. It's very expensive, very time-consuming, but incredibly rich because we can go very deeply and go over and over and over again. And it is through hypnotherapy or hypnagogic sort of process, a trance or meditation approach of being able to go into these experiences. By the 4th time that you've had a past life regression, the quality of your depth of going into it and the quality of your ability to actually feel very present with details that are pretty amazingly able to be proved by historical reference, it's pretty mind-boggling. It's really intriguing. It's really interesting. And I would recommend a book that I do mention in both of these books by Heather Friedman Rivera, or Heather Rivera Friedman. She's a registered nurse and has, I think, a master's as a nurse. She's a jurisprudence. She's a JD as a lawyer, and she also has a doctorate in some level or aspect of spiritual studies. And she wrote her books along these lines of understanding the empirical impact of past life regressions upon people's lives. And her book is a fascinating book, and you can find that reference in both of those books that I just mentioned. So take a look at that. It's also my book, Own Your Peace, because it's very helpful along that way. Okay, so now let's move into astral projection. Astral projection is actually very closely akin to when you left your body and you watched what was happening to you, or you left your body so as to not be aware what was happening to you, and you went away elsewhere. And you may have done that because you had a near-death experience or out-of-death experience. You may have done that because the horrors of what you were experiencing you just weren't going to connect to. So a part of you mentally traveled away from your body, or spiritually, soulfully traveled away from your body and went somewhere else so that you were not that present. And that's a form of astral projection. Astral is the belief that you can take aspects of who you are and move it into the astral world. And the word astral means spiritual. We can fine-tune the definition even more than that, but let's just say it's like you and your soul and your spiritualness are able to travel to spiritual realms. And we know that individuals that have experienced after-death or near-death experiences literally travel out of their body and see people doing things in the waiting room or in the operating room or in the nurse's hall or in another home of some relative that they go visit, and then they come back to their body and they report what they saw, and that's what happened. And so I teach classes in astral projection so that people can actually experiment with going and visiting someone on a spiritual level, and then I have them call up that person and kind of say, hey, what were you doing at such and such a time? And it's fascinating. About 30% of the people, actually first time out, have a real confirming experience, because it's not all that hard. We actually do it in our dreams and at nighttime. We actually do it in our imagination at times. I believe that this is something that we all do, but we just don't do it consciously or deliberately. But when we've gone through abuse and trauma, we often have an automatic out-of-body experience. And that would be like astral projection. So now, taking that you have already had this, probably on the basis of going through astral abuse and trauma, there are people I talk to, not my clients, because I never talk about my clients, who say, I never want to do astral projection because when I did that, when I was being abused and traumatized, I did it because it was a horrible situation. So I just associate astral projection and out-of-body experiences to having a horrible experience. I get it. And what's so very nice about all of this is you don't need to do astral projection if it doesn't suit you. There are too many other tools that are amazing for you to use, like past life regressions. You don't have to use that. That's totally fine. But on the other hand, you may actually find that as you learn to astral project yourself, you gain a better sense of who you are as a spiritual being, who you are as a physical being, and what your powers are in both the physical and the spiritual domains, and how to interface those. And so I'm going to suggest that if you're interested in studying astral projection, out-of-body experiences that you do consciously and deliberately for interesting or purposeful reasons, I recommend it. I actually truly, deeply enjoyed the experience myself, regardless of the painful out-of-body experiences I've had as well. Okay, now, let's move on to remote viewing. Remote viewing got started because the government realized that other governments were teaching people how to travel with their mind to be able to either have psychic reads. We weren't quite sure if it was a psychic read or if they were actually traveling literally with their mind through time and through space to be able to spy on someone else. And the intricacy of the system of being able to do this is pretty mind-boggling. The research on this is equally mind-boggling, and you're more than welcome to look at remote viewing and just be kind of amazed. You can be skeptical, but what I find about remote viewing is that it also gives people a real sense of their power to influence, their power to observe, and their power to function on both the physical and spiritual level. And it's life transforming when you're able to do that. And again, now, how would that help you with recovery from abuse and trauma? Well, again, if it doesn't appeal to you and it feels like it's too much part of your trauma, forget about it. It isn't essential. You don't have to travel down any sort of spiritual path if it feels traumatizing. If you were molested by a Catholic priest and you never want to talk to another Catholic or go to a Catholic mass ever again in your life, you don't have to at all. There's so many other options that are wonderful out there that are just will help you touch your own spirituality. You don't need to go someplace that's hard. But if you find that, yes, you know what, I remember my mind traveling and knowing things that I didn't make sense for me to know, but I knew them. And in knowing them, it actually helped me avoid some very traumatizing and abusive situations. And I may have been even given information that I didn't pay attention to related to that trauma. I knew I shouldn't go there. I had this sense, I had this awareness, I had this dream, I had this foresight. I was told, I was informed, I heard the voice, but I didn't heed that information. And I don't want you to sit there and say that and kick yourself and be upset with yourself or take undue blame and responsibility. Remember, we're not here to harm anybody or disrespect you in any way, so don't do that. But instead be able to say, if I could learn how to listen to that, heed it, discern it when it's reasonable and when it's not. If I can learn to travel to something and get a discernment or a read on it and know and have that same clarity that I had before that traumatic event but I didn't pay attention to, what power and control would I have in my life? You have to experiment with it, because there is such a thing as a false psychic read, right? How many times have I had this horrible feeling about something happening to one of my children, and I just go, oh my gosh, I can't let go of this. This just feels awful. And I contact them and they're completely fine. And so obviously I've stepped right into my own fear, my own worst fear, because my own worst fear would be something would happen to my children, right? But on the other hand, there have been those times when I've had that psychic hit, have followed up on it, and been able to intervene in a helpful way. And it's our ability to try to figure out how to discern that, or even deliberately decide, I would like to know information about something and I'm going to go travel into that domain and help myself out. The Silva method of mind control is about being able to go into a meditative alpha state, the brainwave of alpha state. And actually, I think that's probably a misnomer, because I think they're doing alpha, beta, and gamma with delta. I mean, I can go into the complexities of EEG brainwaves, but they go into a deep meditative state that's still alert. And they're able to connect with information that is external to themselves and pull it back and be able to create things that are very powerful. And it is that capacity that Silva method mind control was very able to build wonderful things upon it. And many people, the Mind Valley leader, Vishen, is very much informed and guided by his many years of teaching the Silva method of mind control. And he's going to be teaching a wonderful intuition class this December 2018 based on this as well, because he has purchased the rights to use this as part of the Mind Valley schools, which is a wonderful, mindvalley.com. I check it out. They have wonderful meditations, wonderful teachers, wonderful ways of looking at the integration of spirituality and everyday life success. So his capacity to use the Silva mind control, he really attributes a lot of his success to, because he was able to create and manifest and discover and discern and travel to it, to see it. So now, I have this belief that those of us who have experienced abuse and trauma actually have more facility with being able to be spiritual, because we have probably gone through astral projection, out-of-body experiences, even near-death experiences. We've done remote viewing. We've had psychic hits, and we may not have listened to them. We've had times when we've been such horrible torment and torture that we've tried with our whole fiber of being to pray ourselves into a better situation, and it didn't always help, right? And that's one thing we want to talk about is, why believe in a God that didn't help? Why believe in a God that would let that happen? And when I'm actually stepping away from that question, when I say, what of our spiritual capacities do we have so underdeveloped as a human species that's just waiting there for us to tap into? I think a ton, and I'm just mentioning a few in this one course. And I think that as you've gone through abuse and trauma, chances are you tapped into some of those tools almost more powerfully than an individual that's had a very easy life, because you had to. Because maybe there even was a third man factor. And the third man factor is this. The third man factor is in horrible situations, sometimes it feels like an angel came and helped and intervened. And I don't know if you've experienced that angel, that intervening power and force and influence that somehow helped you out of the situation. What I'm suggesting to you is that does occur, and number two, we can actually be our own third man factor. We can actually go and help ourselves in situations. Joe Dispenza has a fascinating book called Be Your Spiritual Self. Being your spiritual self, and he talks about how he decides to do a time travel with himself, and he travels into being his future self, and then his future self travels back into being his present self. Travels back to watching his present self and helping his present self. And the interesting dialogue between his future self and his present self and the interface, it's a really interesting idea. I've never done that. I will do that now that I've contemplated that, just to see what that's like. But consider that if we can experience our spirituality and our spiritual powers and our spiritual abilities to interface with all the undefined aspects of the physical and non-physical world, which of course we can never get to the all, but just imagine the wonderful extremes we could go to so that we could really have a sense of our own power to create a preponderance of good in our life. Now notice I said preponderance. And this is how I deal with this. And I talk about this in my book, Paths to Recover After Abuse and Trauma. So in Paths to Recovery After Abuse and Trauma, I talk about that the dominant influence in any situation is the one that will own the moment. So if my right hand dominates my left hand, my right hand is shaking my left hand. And if my left hand says, no, stop, now my left hand is refusing to participate. And this is like, wait a minute, I just lost my influence, right? Now my left hand is all by itself, but maybe my left hand comes and dominates my right hand, now shakes my right hand. And the right hand says, no, stop doing that. And this is still, I'm not letting you do that. Excuse me, the silliness of this illustration, but that's the idea of the dominant influence. And the idea is that you need to be the biggest power in your life. I've asked before, who is the most influential person in your life? Who is the most powerful person in your life? And ultimately, the answer to that question needs to be you. I need to be the most powerful and most influential person in my life. Ultimately, I need to be that. I don't need to defer to anybody, but I might ask them to help me. I might have a team of people to assist me, but they're still my team. I am not subservient to someone else. I am living my life. And that's where you want to get to. And so I'm suggesting to you on a spiritual level that you live your life and be the dominant influence in your life as a spiritual being and physical. Yeah, let's take that to a whole nother level. On a spiritual level, if you're the dominant influence, let's say this is you and this is someone else, and you say, okay, I'm gonna ask you to be my team. Please team up with me, and we're now gonna lift something together. Oh, thank you, left hand, for helping my right hand lift up, right? So now my right hand has a team member, and the team member says, sure, I'll be glad to help. Because I'm one of your team, I'll be glad to help because I'm living my life as a helper to you in this moment. Hopefully this is a person that lives their own identity, right? But you could dominate this person and make them a servant to you, but that would be kind of abusive, right? As opposed to a team player. But in addition, realize that this person has to live their own life too. And there are times when they want their energy, their presence to be the dominant influence, and you might be in their path. And they might come along and push you, and you might feel the impact of them pushing you, and they go on with their life. So we are influenced by other people. So at those moments when we're thrown that curve, when we're influenced by something that came along and was the most dominant influence, like an abuser in trauma, that was the most dominant influence in our life, and it completely hit us and moved us out of our normal satellite orbit, so to speak. Then the idea is coming back into being our own dominant influence. So the next time this comes by, we go, oh, I'm getting out of the way of that one. Or the next time this dominant influence comes by and it begins to hurt, we know how to shift as quickly as we can. Or the next time the dominant influence comes by, we can discern and say, sure, I'll partner with you, I'll team up for a while, and then I'll go on my way. That means that you become this conscious individual that interfaces with other influences, because other influences will always be there. So your knowing of your spiritual top powers and your knowing of consciously using them, that helps you have even more dominant influence in your life. You'll never have all. Well, I don't know about that actually. Maybe one day you will. But to the degree that you can say, I may not always be the most dominant influence in my life, but I can potentiate it. I can make it probabilistically that I'm going to try to be as conscious as I can to be the most dominant, relevant influence in my life, to thrive, to create good. You can create whatever you want, but I'm hoping you'll create good. I'm trying to influence you to create good in your life and others' lives, right? That's my shtick. Truth is, it's up to you what you create. And especially up to you what you create when you can consciously use all different tools on an emotional level, on a biological level, on a social level, on a psychotherapeutic level, a psychological level, and a spiritual level. And that's what this course number 12 is all about. That's why I have to include this in a class of recovery, because can you actually recover if you don't also know that this part of you exists for you to be a powerful influencer in your life? No. These are powerful, powerful tools. And so I suggest you cultivate them just like you would anything. So after I finish teaching my 6th class, I'm going to do some yoga. You know why? Because I want to influence my body to stretch and strengthen and breathe and feel alive. And after that, I'm going to go take a walk, because I've been doing this for a long time, talking to you, and I need to go be present in my body. Why do I consciously choose that? Because I want to consciously cultivate the integration of my body with my soul, with my psychology, with my community, with my organs inside me, and with my spirit that engages in the middle realm, the middle earth. And all I'm doing is I'm using this as an example that you are this all. And what are you going to do after you listen to this class and do the self-reflection and do the knowledge gained and listen to the meditations? What are you going to do after that? Because when you're the one that decides what you're going to do after that, whether it's to help someone or involve with someone or be loving and kind to someone or on your own, whatever you're going to do is your way of expressing your dominant ability to influence your life as the key player in being you. And that's you thriving toward the you want to create as you pull away from the recovery process of abuse and trauma. It's pretty exciting. Okay, I'll see you in the last class.